say I was very pleased with this place and rather surprised by the quaintness of it. But I'm the only person here.
Welcome to Veliko-Tarnovo, a quaint, historic, and lovely town where I begin a series of videos from Bulgaria with or without a welcoming committee.
A well-preserved medieval town on the banks of the Yantra River, surrounded by gorgeous hills with a great fortress and architecture still intact from the 1200s. This town used to be the most important place in the Bulgarian state. When the Bulgars moved south into what is now Bulgaria in the 600s, Tarnovo became the most important fortress of the so-called First Bulgarian State. Bulgaria's neighbor to the southeast, of course, is Turkey, or Turkey, and in those days, Istanbul was Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. For a time, the Bulgars held their own against Byzantium before eventually being subdued. But that subjugation didn't last. The Bulgars rose again in the late 1100s, and Tarnovo became the capital of the Second Bulgarian State that flourished for another 200 years before the Turkish Ottoman Empire overran Bulgaria and subdued it for nearly 5 centuries. Like other East European countries, Bulgaria had its time under Soviet rule from the end of World War II up until the USSR was dissolved 45 years later. But it's been a member of both NATO and the European Union for about 2 decades now. That said, even today, especially among some older Bulgarians, there exists an affinity for things Russian. There's a feeling of affinity toward Russia because of the role of the Russian czars in the late 1800s to partially liberate Bulgaria from the Ottomans. Veliko-Tarnovo, or Tarnovo, almost always hyphenated, is a bit of a tongue twister and not the easiest name to remember. So just think of its original name, Tarnovo, and know that in 1965 the powers that be decided to put Veliko in front of it. Veliko means great. It was done to honor the city's history as an old capital of Bulgaria. So it's Great Tarnovo, and people here must like it that way, because you rarely hear anyone drop the Veliko. I'm headed to the crown jewel of Tarnovo's power during the golden age of the Second Bulgarian State, Zarevet's fortress, which lies largely intact above the town and is its most important tourist attraction. And even for those who aren't enamored of history, it's a terrific place from which to get a view of the city and the countryside below. Today, this fortress with its once grand palace is a restored ruin, but it was once the home to 4 czars of medieval Bulgaria, heavily fortified behind a high outer wall and an inner wall that made the fortress supposedly impenetrable until the Ottomans finally breached it. The one-time great Hungarian palace here is really little more than foundation. The real attraction is at the very top of this steep hill. The Eastern Orthodox Church. I've made it to the top of the hill, and I'm about to walk inside the Cathedral of the Holy Ascension. Originally, the seat of the Bulgarian Patriarch from its construction starting in the late 11th century until it was destroyed by the Ottomans in 1393. The church you see here was reconstructed in the 1970s and 80s. It hasn't been reconsecrated, so it isn't a functional church per se, but a museum that was opened in 1985. It's the latest iteration of a place of worship that has stood on this hill in this spot for at least 1,500 years. The original church here was a Roman church built by the Byzantines in the 5th century. There is access to the top of it. It's 6 stories high, and I've come up an elevator to get to it. It's the highest viewpoint, looking down on the city. As I mentioned earlier, the once grand palace has virtually disappeared. The front of it that you see behind me has been reconstructed, a very small part of the total. From the display sign you can see what the palace is assumed to have once looked like, and then compare it to what's here now, and there's quite a stark difference. There aren't very many people around. When I first arrived here, there were quite a few, mainly off of tour buses, but that surge appears to have ended. Those buses tell the story of the tourist industry and Veliko-Tarnovo. For many of the people who travel here do so as part of tours, most often from the capital, Sofia, mostly overnight tours. So people stream in here on buses to see the city, and then they leave. The reason for that undoubtedly is because of the location, not so convenient for those making simple east-west trips across the country, which is the most frequent. That tourist trail, if you will, runs from Sofia to Plovdiv onto the Black Sea in the east to Varna, and unfortunately or fortunately for Veliko-Tarnovo, it is not on that axis, and so the main east-west rail line does not run here. Neither does the main north-south rail line stop here. It stops at a city, Gorno, and it's the first part of the name, a few miles from here, and you change trains to come the short distance to Tarnovo. It's probably a curse for business people, but it's kind of nice because it gives this town a kind of out-of-the-way air that makes it very pleasant. It's almost as if you're discovering something that's maybe only slightly, but still a bit off the beaten path. But to really see it properly, you've got to be prepared to do a little hiking, and by that I mean get up into the residential alleyways among the main commercial streets in town. They're very pleasant, with flowers and windowsills and friendly people. I'm here in the Varusha quarter, one of the more picturesque residential areas of town, and I'm walking down one of its most prominent streets, that is Gurko Street. You might think of it as Veliko-Tarnovo's old main street before the modern traffic flow shifted to other streets above it. This neighborhood is a bit lower on the hill, with marvelous old revival houses decorated with vines and flowers, and where the breeze comes directly off the Yantra River. This street is named for a Russian general credited with liberating the town from Ottoman control in 1877. It's said to have been a bloodless event, with the Ottomans offering little resistance, and with the townspeople like others in Bulgaria, jubilant after 480 years of Ottoman rule. As you can tell, this is a quaint, charming neighborhood. The houses appear to be almost piled on top of each other, yet neatly arranged. There's this thing about hill towns, no matter where they are, especially old ones like this one, they were not built for automobiles. The old ones were meant for pedestrians, maybe horses and carriages. And for that reason, many such places around the world are noisy in the modern age, because the sounds of vehicles echo off the walls of buildings. That's no less true of Veliko-Tarnovo. And that's one of the reasons I really appreciate this neighborhood and this historic street, because you can walk around here and enjoy solitude, some tranquility, and yet feel as though you're in the middle of town. This beautiful old church behind me, which is in a very small plaza in a very unusual spot on this hill. I have no idea how old it is. There is an inscription over the door that has the date 1873. That may very well be the date it was inaugurated, or it could be older than that. But at any rate, this church is the church that I look down upon immediately from my balcony. In fact, my pension is directly to my right. The upper windows still are in good shape. They have some latticed bars around them, but the lower windows, there's no glass. It appears that someone has applied boards to keep people from trying to get in. It's like a relic of the kind that you do not expect in a neighborhood like this. The most significant of the old churches left standing in this town, and there are many, is this one, the Holy 40 Martyrs Church, built in the year 1230 by one of the czars of the Second Bulgarian Empire. For Bulgarians who are overwhelmingly Eastern Orthodox in their religious orientation, this is more than just another church. It houses some of the oldest written records of the Hungarian state, dating back to the First Hungarian Empire. And in 1908, it was from this church that Tsar Ferdinand proclaimed Hungary's complete independence from the declining Ottoman Empire before the advent of the Republic of Turkey in 1923. Veliko-Tarnovo takes its history seriously, as evidenced by this grand monument erected in 1985 in commemoration of the four great czars of Bulgaria, with historic connections to the town. One way to think of Veliko-Tarnovo geographically is as a large horseshoe with the Yantra River at its base, circling around a point on which is the monument to the czars and the city's art museum. I'm in a park beside that art museum now, which is rather typical of the many parks that dot this small city, making it not only a delightful place to walk and shop and look at the old architecture here, but with genuine escapes into the trees, into nature, within the town.
You don't have to know much about Bulgaria to enjoy Veliko-Tarnovo. You could think of it merely as a Bulgarian country getaway and do what people have done here for ages, follow the sound of the river that runs through it. If you're lucky, you could even have it to yourself. except for maybe the occasional fly fisherman.